Hello, and welcome back. I'm Liz, and I hope you're ready to do some serious processing with me today because we're going to be going over social processes, an important topic in the psych-soc portion of the MCAT. In this lesson, we'll be learning about some of the social processes, and in doing so, we'll be learning about some of the variables that can impact the application of these social processes, and we'll be going over some sample situations. Let's get started. In order to be able to really dive into some testable social processes and how they can affect our behavior, it's important to first have a more general idea of what a social action is. I've got a question for you. Why are you taking the MCAT? It's probably not because you woke up one day and thought, yeah, I just really want to take another standardized test. Definitely not most people's reasoning. You probably have further life goals that require this test. Getting into med school maybe, and becoming a doctor, that require taking the MCAT. More specifically, the people who run the medical schools have told you you must take this test in order to attend. So here you are prepping. The point of this little tangent is, you didn't just decide to take the MCAT completely independent of other people. The expectations of other people, in this case of med schools, directly led you to this behavior. So you're not just taking action when you take the MCAT, you're taking a social action. You're making a decision or behaving in a certain way because of others. You even do certain things like wear specific types of clothing in different settings because it's societally expected from day to day. This is a social norm. If you think about it, a huge proportion of what we do every day is dictated by the people around us. That's why social actions are of such interest. A huge proportion of all of our action is social in nature. For some specific phenomena, scientists have been able to take this whole thing one step further and identify an overarching pattern of common behavior in response to social factors. We'll call these social processes. We're going to take a look at a few of these today in the same way you might see them on the MCAT, in real-life type scenarios. Let's start with our first entry into the table, a short scenario about Tyler. Tyler's got two major behavioral options. What are they, and what social process would be at play in his decision to behave in one way versus another? Let's start our discussion with the overall process here, the bystander effect. You've probably heard a few anecdotes about this effect already. It's a pretty famous one in social psych. The bystander effect helps to explain why, sometimes even in extreme situations, people can be unlikely to assist someone else in need. The bystander effect also stands out because it's a social process that's characterized by inaction rather than action. Tyler's got two options here. He can help out, or he can just stay back and watch the stranger fall down the stairs and hit the ground without assisting. If we're thinking about social psych, one factor to always consider as potentially causing an effect is the group itself. We have two options for Tyler, a small group and a large group. In which of these two situations is Tyler more likely to stand back and do nothing? Where would we be more likely to see that bystander effect? In a small group, Tyler is likely to feel the need to help the stranger more acutely, so we'd expect that he'd help out. In a large group, though, Tyler is less likely to feel that need to help, and more likely to feel the alluring pull of the bystander effect and decide to do nothing. There are a couple of other factors here that are also contributing to the bystander effect. For one, Tyler doesn't know the other person. They're a stranger, so he doesn't necessarily feel any sense of closeness to them or to the overall group seeing the concert. Further, the person who fell down the stairs isn't really in a ton of danger in that situation. They're probably not going to imminently die. So Tyler doesn't have an imperative reason to intervene. We know that with an extremely dangerous situation, someone can overcome the bystander effect, but that's not really what we're looking at with someone falling down the stairs. Thus, our takeaway, a large group, especially one that's not close, is more likely to lead to the bystander effect. Let's consider our second possible situation, this time about Alex. Alex is at an event, and some of the other attendees have apparently become violent. The truth is, there are a lot of effects and other factors that could impact Alex in this situation. She could be scared, she could run away, she could join in. She's got a lot of stuff she could potentially do. If there were other people being harmed, we could even see the bystander effect occur. Let's make this simple though, and decide that Alex just has two choices, to join in or to not join in with the violence. If Alex chose to participate in the violence caused by her fellow attendees, what effect would be occurring? This is another effect with a rather negative reputation that's honestly pretty well earned, de-individuation. Sometimes in some social dynamics, people will participate in behaviors they'd never consider on their own. This effect, where someone loses their own sense of responsibility, is de-individuation. In case you're thinking that violence is a rather extreme behavior, yeah, it is. And it's actually a really good example of something that could very much occur as a result of de-individuation. Be careful though, because de-individuation isn't always bad. It does tend to have some very bad effects in some cases, but you can also get an increased sense of belonging and better behavior in a group with this effect as well. That's a big part of why this social process is so interesting. De-individuation can lead to truly heinous acts by people who are otherwise considered good people, and who maybe would not even consider themselves capable of this level of poor behavior. It also makes for a really good contrast with the bystander effect, because while the bystander effect is to do nothing, de-individuation usually means you're doing something, and that action is not one you'd expect of the person who's committing it. There are a few things that can cause an increase in de-individuation. One of them is group size. How does group size affect de-individuation? To some degree, de-individuation does increase with larger group size. So if the only thing we knew here was that we were comparing Alex's behavior in a small group to her behavior in a big group, we'd expect de-individuation to be less likely in the smaller group and more likely in the big group. That said, there are a few other factors that also tend to lead to increased de-individuation. What else might be happening here to increase the likelihood of de-individuation occurring? We're told Alex is at a live event. If it's a live event for a group she feels really strongly attached to, for something like a political rally or a group of fellow believers in a certain cause, or something similar to that, she's definitely more likely to behave in a way she wouldn't normally. De-individuation is even more encouraged in some situations by establishment of things to increase the group dynamic feeling. Something like a uniform that makes you feel like part of the group instead of your own person. Further, we're told she at least doesn't know some of the people at the event. If she didn't know anyone and felt really anonymous, her sense of personal responsibility would go down, and she'd be more likely to behave violently with the group. This is where those disguise or costume examples tends to come in. With social processes, if you see a disguise or a costume, that increases anonymity and increases the chances of things like de-individuation. Let's move away from some of these really dark examples to a phenomenon that has an equally bad reputation it may not always deserve. Read this short interlude about Adam, and then, based on the scenario, identify what social process is potentially going to impact Adam's behavior. If the people who are encouraging Adam to change his behavior are his friends, then we can infer he's going to be at risk of succumbing to that dreaded peer pressure. In this case, the peer pressure isn't a bad thing. It's pressure to study, probably something most of us could stand to hear a little bit more of from our friends. This is an important note to remember about peer pressure. It's not an effect that's defined as positive or negative. It's simply another social process phenomenon that can occur when social actions are occurring. We already saw that group size increased both bystander and de-individuation effects. What's group size going to do to peer pressure, and what else in this situation could change the peer pressure effect? Well, group size is going to do absolutely nothing. The size of the group isn't what defines the impact of peer pressure at all. However, there's another factor introduced here that does matter, that it's Adam's friends who are asking. Friendship implies this is a group that Adam's close to, and for that reason, Adam's more likely to study than if strangers had asked him, regardless of how many people are doing the asking. The reputation of his friends and his feelings about them could also potentially play a role here. After all, if these aren't his cool friends, he may feel a little bit less inclined to join in with their behavior. Let's explore one final social process. Here we're told Isaac is about to perform something for a group, a trumpet piece. What social process specifically impacts performance on tasks, and how would that process apply to Isaac? The social process at play in this situation is definitely social facilitation, which dictates that for an easy or well-practiced task, performance in front of a group is going to improve. To increase the likelihood of seeing some social facilitation, we know that some kind of easy or practiced task is needed, and we were actually told that Isaac has been practicing this piece. So as long as this piece isn't crazy difficult, we'd expect him to do well when performing in front of a group. How would the size of the group impact Isaac's performance, assuming he's very comfortable with this piece? Social facilitation tells us you get improved performance with greater arousal, and we can think of arousal as being inherently tied to audience size. With a bigger audience, Isaac will be feeling more arousal, and while he'd do well for a small group, he'd probably give a more exceptional performance in front of a large group. The key here is we'd expect his performance in front of people to be even better than his practice, and we'd expect that effect to continue to increase until we hit his maximum potential, so long as the task isn't too hard or brand new. We could expect Isaac's overall sense of self-efficacy to play a role here as well. If he's comfortable with the trumpet in general, maybe he's been performing for many years, we definitely expect social facilitation and an improved performance for the large group as compared to the smaller group, and both are still going to be better than practice. You can even extrapolate this effect to your own test day, and I encourage you to do so. On test day, you'll be in a room with people in it, as compared to testing completely on your own. If you practice well and prep sufficiently, social facilitation will be on your side. In reality, test day is a little bit more complicated than this, but building up your confidence with additional practice is definitely not going to hurt with that arousal performance curve on test day. That's one possible effect of a social process I think you'd probably love to see happen on your own MCAT. In this lesson, we learned how to use and apply several different terms from social process phenomena. We also got a chance to take a look at them in action with some situations, and we got to see some of the variables that can change how these social processes occur. Make sure to get some practice, not just with the terminology itself, but also with some applications before test day.